order to understand where we are today, let's follow the line of blood and money throughout the past 4 decades. 1979, after the Islamic regime occupied Iran, they did not only execute their opponents inside of the country, they went on an international killing spree. Paris, December 1979. Washington, July 1981. Mainz, April 1982. Paris, February 1984. Istanbul, August 1985. Frankfurt, November 1985. London, August 1986. Hamburg, January 1987. Vienna, July 1987. London, July 1987. Geneva, August 1987. The Islamic regime is killing people all over the globe, but they're also facing economic breakdown, selling their oil at discount prices. Discount prices? Perfect opportunity for the foreign ministers of Germany and Austria to pay their first visit after the revolution to Tehran to re-establish their ties with the regime. What was the US doing to stop these international killings? Well, from 1981 till 86, the US senior administration was busy selling arms to the Islamic regime. Yeah, selling arms. Even though there was an arms embargo, even though there were sanctions, why did the US do that? Yeah, by money, of course. They were thinking they could use the proceedings from these arms sales to fund a rebel group in Nicaragua, the Contras, which backfired, by the way. The official story of the White House was that they were trying to do these weapon sales to free 7 US hostages that were held hostage by the Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Hezbollah. The Islamic regime funded Hezbollah. That is, killing people with arms, taking people hostage, selling them arms to free the hostages. Yeah, everybody got that, okay. 1988, Supreme Leader Khomeini issues a fatwa on the political prisoners. He forms a death committee. One of the members of this committee is Ebrahim Raisi, who right now is the president of the Islamic regime. More than 30,000 political prisoners were executed in this massacre. In the next 10 years, from 1988 to 98, a series of disappearances and murders of over 100 opposition figures, intellectuals, dissidents, and critics of the regime happened inside and outside of Iran. These are called the chain murders of Iran. One of the prominent names that are never forgotten, which are murdered in the chain murders of Iran, is Shahpur Bakhtiar, the former prime minister of the late Shah and the leader of the national resistance movement of Iran. In 1981, he and his secretary were stabbed to death in their residence in France. This week is the anniversary of his murder and the murder of Feridun Farrokhzad. Feridun Farrokhzad was a well-known singer, actor, poet, TV and radio host, humanitarian, and well-loved political opposition figure. In 1992, he was also murdered in his residence in Bonn, Germany. One of the key reporters who investigated the chain murders of Iran was shot in the head and paralyzed for life. With more than 100 murders all around the globe and inside Iran, there was so much bloodshed, so much pain, that the US decided it's time for another form of diplomacy, called sports diplomacy. And in 1998, the US national wrestling team became the first team to travel to Iran and take part in 16 tournaments year after year after year, even in 2017, when the Iranian wrestler Navid Afkari, who took part in the nationwide protests in 2017 and 18, was unlawfully arrested, sentenced to death, and executed. Even his brothers and sisters were taken to prison. One of his brothers is still in solitary confinement. And with the beginning of the millennium, also began the deep friendship between the tyrants of the regime and Western companies and governments. In 2004, the president of Iran's Chamber of Commerce said, "For us, Austria has become the gateway to the European Union." Yeah, Austria was good at that, but not as great as Germany. By 2007, the German company Siemens reported a record deal of 465 million euros with the regime. By 2008, 75% of all industrial companies in Iran used German technology. That's why Germany was very eager to block all unilateral sanctions against the regime. In 2008, the German exports to the regime are at an all-time high of 5 billion euros per year. Billion. That's with 9 zeros. In the same year, the company ThyssenKrupp signed a $25 million deal with the regime, funding oppression, murder, international terrorism, executions, nuclear weapons, and all kinds of hate crimes of the regime. In 2009, during the Green Movement, while protesters like Nero Soltani were shot dead in the street, the Austrian Chamber of Commerce organized a seminar for businessmen about opportunities on how to invest and trade with the Islamic regime. Austrian exports grew to 350 million euros per year. But it's not just the money, it's the nature of the trade that is very concerning. Austrian businesses were actually trading with straw companies, so companies that belong to the Revolutionary Guards, such as Tech Hydropower, which built a dam in Iran for the engineering arm of the IRGC. Remember IRGC? This is the regime's military, not the people's military. They defend the regime. They control the economy. They control power, energy, communications. They build energy machinery. They build banking structures. And oh yeah, they murder and rape men, women, and children. And they're also in charge of the regime's nuclear programs and missiles. They develop commercial bodies that work undercover all over the world to obtain equipment, knowledge, technology, and they're trying to circumvent sanctions by specializing on dual-purpose technology and equipment, which means that you can use that equipment for two purposes, civilian purposes like medicine, for example, but they're also essential components of the development of nuclear weapons and missiles. In 2010, the company Siemens is so much under international pressure that they announced they will pull out of Iran. But don't worry, other German companies take over the part. A company called Babcock Borsing Services promotes its expertise in magnetic and nuclear technology and services. The market leader in tunneling machines, Herrenknecht, and the company Wirth export drilling technology and equipment to use to hide enrichment facilities from the international community. Even the delivery of truck-mounted cranes is advertised openly, even though everybody knows these cranes are used for public hangings. Monitoring and so-called security technology is sold by companies like Nokia, Siemens, Bosch, and many other companies. But an increasing amount of exports from Germany to Iran are not going directly, but via Dubai, and therefore they're not included in the official export data. That's the way to circumvent sanctions. Sanctions? What sanctions? Let's not forget that the Islamic regime throughout all these years are invited to human rights conferences or the Munich Security Conference, for example, every single year. In 2013, the Green Party leader Claudia Roth even high-fives the Islamic regime ambassador in the Munich Security Conference. High five to security all over the world. Yeah. And in 2015, of course, the Islamic regime and the world powers reached a deal called the nuclear deal, or the JCPOA, where they're lifting UN sanctions. And in 2016, everybody is just visiting everybody. The German vice president is traveling to Iran to promote trade. The Minister of Intelligence of the Islamic regime flies to Berlin to, I don't know what to do there. And President Rouhani is invited to go to Rome, where they're covering up the statues to spare them the view of nude old sculptures. In 2017, Sweden's feminist government women's delegation even goes to Iran, and all of the women there in that delegation cover up their heads with a mandatory hijab, promoting feminism everywhere, but not in Iran. At the same time, their Swedish citizen Ahmad Reza Jalali is taken hostage there and receives the death sentence for corruption on earth. And while everybody is jamming with the Islamic regime, visit me, no, I visit you, they're sending another one of their Ministry of Intelligence officials, Asadullah Assadi, disguised as a diplomat from Austria, who takes a bomb from Austria over Germany to Paris to kill hundreds of opposition figures and politicians from the US and Europe in one event. That event was thankfully stopped and he was arrested, but remember his name. In 2019, another wave of nationwide protests is repressed and stopped by the violence of the regime, killing 1,500 protesters and stopping the movement. And what did our Western nations do to stop this kind of killing? Germany, France, and the UK create the Instex mechanism, by which they can continue their trade with the Islamic regime and bypass those sanctions. Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden and Finland happily joined into the fun. In 2020, the pandemic hit, but not as hard as the Islamic regime hit its people. In January of 2020, the Islamic regime shot down a passenger flight, killing 176 people. Nationwide protests broke out, which were again leading to nationwide mass executions and people standing in front of the prisons trying to stop the madness. 3 new European dissidents were kidnapped: Habib Chab from Sweden, my dad Gazelle Sharmahd from Germany, and another German citizen, Nahi Tarabi, inside of Iran. Navid Afghari, the Iranian wrestler who was arrested while the wrestling team of the US was in Iran, is executed. And by the end of the year, in December, another French blogger and dissident, Ruhollah Zam, who was also kidnapped and taken to Iran, is executed. At the same time, the foreign minister of the Islamic regime, Mr. Zarif, is invited to Germany, France, UK, Spain and Italy. And all of these countries are combining their efforts to prevent the snapback mechanism of the JCPOA, because the regime didn't follow what they promised, and now sanctions could be reapplied, and Western governments don't like those sanctions. In 2021, in Khuzestan, nationwide protests break out after a fatal water shortage, and again the regime is all over the place, killing men and women, and activists ask the Western nations help to stop this. Well, what does the world and the UN do? They promote the Islamic regime to the UN's Women's Rights Commission. In February 2022, the sham trial of my father, German hostage Gazelle Sharmahd, starts in Tehran to decide if he will be condemned to death by the regime. At the same time, Germany invites the foreign minister of the Islamic regime to the Munich Security Conference to talk about, and I quote, "the art of the deal, Iran and the future of the JCPOA." And later on meets with the German foreign minister Annalena Baerbock to save my dad's life, to free the hostages, to do anything human life related? No, silly. Follow the line of money and oil and you will see this talk was of course about the revival of the JCPOA. And while the innocent people all over Khuzestan and all over Iran are butchered by the regime, the president of Austria congratulates the incoming president Raisi. You know who else congratulated Raisi on his position? The Crown Prince of Kuwait, the Sultan of Oman, and the Secretary General of the Hezbollah. In September of 2022, when the regime murdered Gina Mahsa Amini, and the world noticed and stood up, and the people of Iran began a revolution where even foreign politicians, Western politicians like Hadi al-Habib, cut their hair in solidarity with the women of Iran, and then went to the back door and spoke with the foreign minister of the regime, and then released the biggest terrorist of the regime, Asadullah Assadi, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for his attempted terrorism attack back to the Islamic regime. Which brings us to this year, 2023, where in the beginning of this year, the UN selected the Islamic regime as the head of the Social Forum. Makes total sense. And President Raisi, the president of the Islamic regime, 1 month from now, will be invited to speak in New York at the UN's General Assembly once again. See, I have to be honest with you. I was able to Google all of this information last night and make a video out of it. So looking at this line of bloodshed and of money, I can be sure that right now all of you guys can see this regime, the most evil regime that is every single day, not just since last year, every single day for 4 decades, hanging people to death, executing them in the most evil way of strangulating them to death and kidnapping people all over the world, sentencing them to death, taking people hostage, assassinating people, while meanwhile other people are continuing trade and business with them as if it's something normal. This is not normal. This is absolutely insane. To the decision makers of this world, to the politicians that are out there, you cannot say, I cannot believe that you did not know about this. And if you did not know about this, now you know about this. So show us right now, knowing about all of this, does that make you mad? Can you see the insanity of what you've been doing? And if you can see that, what are you willing to risk? What are you willing to give up to change this madness and come on our side and fight with us for what's right?